you believe in the doctrine of separation of church and state? Most Americans would probably say yes. If you're a Christian, do you have a well-defined biblical worldview regarding morality? When you observe people or organizations violating the boundaries of your moral or ethical views, are you motivated to react, or do you believe in live and let live? Should Christians weigh in on current events which do not directly involve the church? We'll discuss it today on this episode of Craving Answers, Craving God. I'm Chuck Rathert with Aaron Miller. Aaron is the pastor of St. James Lutheran Church in Glen Carbon, Illinois. Aaron, unless someone is living under a rock, there are first magnitude changes taking place in our everyday lives that confront and challenge our sense of right and wrong. These changes have introduced a good deal of instability into our culture. Should a Christian take positions that might add to the discord or keep his opinions to him or herself?
Take positions that might add to the discord. I don't think Christians should take positions to add to discord, but Christians should take positions. The question is did Jesus become a human being, live, die, rise from the dead as a public matter or as a private matter? What I mean is this, is if Jesus' life and death and resurrection is some sort of private, if it's a metaphor for, me, the individual, discovering how to live a life of love, or if it's about me feeling better about myself or not feeling so guilty for my sins, then no, it's a private thing. And lots of Christians think this, is that Jesus is here for me, and it's a private thing. Or did Jesus die and rise from the dead in order to become the Lord of the universe, to rule over everything? When I say everything, I mean everything. Not spiritual stuff, just spiritual stuff, but all principalities and powers and all kings and nations. If that's the case, and I think the Bible totally says it is, then my Christianity, I'm not saying I'm a good Christian. I'm not saying that this represents my views, that my goal is to represent my views. But my Christianity must be public. It must be out there in the marketplace. It's a challenge. It must stand as a challenge to all other worldviews. If it's anything at all, if Jesus' death and resurrection is anything at all, it's a challenge to all the other worldviews which claim to be ascendant, up against his claim to be the Lord of the universe.
So, the old saying, quote, never get involved in a discussion about religion or politics, unquote. There is some wisdom in that adage. There's always the possibility that a religious or political debate will lead to quarreling. Friendships can be damaged or even ended. So what's your take on never get involved wisdom?
Well, I mean, there's wisdom in keeping your mouth shut when you need to. You don't go around throwing everything you think in everybody's face all the time. And you end up knowing who the people are who will appreciate a conversation about ideologies or beliefs and who don't. And so I wouldn't go trying to make people feel uncomfortable. That was your original question about discord. Christianity, any ideology is going to cause discord. I wouldn't intentionally cause it just to cause discord. I don't think that we should be silent. I think John Stuart Mill's free marketplace idea is a goal worth pursuing, which means as a Christian, I should be allowed to speak the truths of Christianity out into the public, but also that I should respectfully listen to those who disagree with me as well. And so the first thing is to engage in that, a respectful, gentle discussion about what we believe, and be prepared if that's what we want. If we want respect and generosity and gentleness from other people, we should be prepared to give it, all of us. The second thing I would say about this too is in terms of Christianity being public, is this. A lot of Christians agree with that, but then they allow themselves to be co-opted by an outside ideology that's not Christian. They allow themselves to be co-opted by a man-made set of ideas. Could be a political party. I don't think Christianity can serve the purposes of either political party. In fact, I know it can't. These man-made political parties, their goal is power. Their goal is political power. That's not what Christianity's goal is. And both parties do this. Both of the main parties in the United States do this, is they want Christianity on their side, to work for them, to be an advisor to them, to be a sticker on their suitcase. And it's not just the political parties, but it's ideological schools in general. What our culture does is this. Our culture divides up into two groups. That's what it'll do over any issue. And we're actually seeing this right now. This is in January of 2024 that we're talking about this. And we've agreed as a culture, out in public, we've agreed that racism is wrong. But now we've come to a problem since October of 2023, which is, what are we going to do with the Jews? Because I think that racism is wrong, and so I think that anti-Semitism is wrong. But there are some people who say that racism is wrong, but they are anti the Jews. And it's breaking the sort of rules about separate groups. It was, one ideological group in our country is anti-racism, and the other ideological group is okay with racism. That's just sort of, I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that's the narrative in the culture. But now the Jews, the one side that was anti-racism, many of them are anti-Jewish, and it breaks this two-sided either or. Are you for me or against me?
Which is why we should never bring it up.
Well,
sorry.
You could say that. I mean, this is one of the tendencies, is to say, well, I don't want to mess around with that. I don't feel like I'm in either one, so I'm just going to keep quiet. I would just say this, is that Christianity has a responsibility to speak out, but not to be on either side. If Christianity is true, well, let's just go back to the political parties. There will be some things about the Republican Party that align with Christian beliefs. There will be some things about the Democratic Party that align with Christian beliefs. But in no cases do either party, all of their platform planks, can they be described as thoroughly Christian. But the enemy, Satan, he loves to put us in a position where we have to decide between the lesser of two evils. And I'm going to read this little quote from C.S. Lewis, which I think is terrific. It's in Mere Christianity. And he's a little discussion about ideologies. And the ideologies he's discussing in this chapter is totalitarianism or individualism. The belief that the individual is supreme, or over against the belief that the community is supreme. And he says both of these are at fault. And he closes off the chapter with this paragraph. This is really sharp. He says, I feel a strong desire to tell you, and I expect you feel a strong desire to tell me, which of these two errors is the worst. You get into a discussion about any sort of political ideology or political group or cultural group, and you kind of figure out which one is the worst, and then we'll bash that one. Well, I'm this one because that side is so much worse. Lewis says that's the devil getting at us. He always sends errors into the world in pairs of opposites. And he always encourages us to spend a lot of time thinking about which is the worse. You see why, of course. He relies on your extra dislike of the one error to draw you gradually into the opposite one. But do not let us be fooled. We have to keep our eyes on the goal and go straight through between both errors. We have no other concern than that with either of them. And I think that that's sharp, because I see Christians falling into this a lot. They'll see one group in the culture and they'll say, that's so bad. That's so bad. And they'll find themselves being pushed to something that's also bad as a way to guard against the thing
just
that's
less
extra
bad.
Yeah. And this whole lesser of two evils project that we frequently find ourselves, and actually the whole political system is, I don't think I'll offend anybody to say that our country probably does not like either of the presidential candidates that are going to be on offer this coming year. Most of the discussion in the around the election between people on the street will be which one is the worst and why I have to vote for this one because the other one is so bad. And I'm probably going to end up agreeing that they're both right, but getting pushed where I have to support somebody because the other one is so bad, Christians cannot allow themselves to be put into that. And now I'm talking broader than politics. I'm not saying you shouldn't vote for a particular political candidate. What I am saying, though, is that Christians must stand over and against all of these impulses to pick a cultural side. And what we're talking about is current events, and there's not a single current event that's going to happen that the sides are not going to be divided. The one fly in the ointment, which I've mentioned, is the whole thing with the Israel-Hamas war and what Americans think about Israel, because that's really kind of, there's people on both sides that disagree with this, and it's really kind of created this fracture between the two groups. And one of the payouts of this has been the state of American academia in the universities has come under question for the first time simply because anti-Semitism has been exposed in the hearts of people who have always said that they're anti-racist. And that's created a lot of disjunct in people who don't know how to handle that. I'm anti-racist, but I'm not anti-Semitic. And it seems to me patently obvious that as a Christian, those two things can go together. Like I can be both non-racist, I can be against racism, and I can be for any sort of ethnic group. But because our culture has been forced to divide up into two separate groups, and those groups have been messy, that this has created a lot of tension. And as Christians, we can stand over against this and say, we think Israel is wrong for moving Palestinians off their land for the past 70 years. We think that the Palestinians are wrong. We think the Hamas is definitely wrong for abducting and killing innocent people. That we can say both of those things. And as Christians, we must say both of those things. As Christians, we must say that the value of the unborn life is sacred. And at the same time say that the economic system, which forces families to pay so much money to have a baby, is also broken and wrong. And those two things are both the case. And when we do that, we will find people on both sides of the ideological spectrum nodding in agreement with us, but also being angry because they disagree with us. Meanwhile, Jesus stands over and against both of these poles in our culture. And so this is a long, rambling answer, I know. And if anybody has questions, you can get back more to me later. And I'm trying to be as specific as needed to make this concrete, but not so specific that I make anybody angry, because I realize that whenever you speak for Jesus, people are going to get upset. Even good people will get upset because he won't play ball with us. He won't kowtow to our sacred cows. He demands to be Lord of all. And that means that none of us are Lord. And that's a difficult position to get into. But that's kind of how I would handling current events as a Christian.
I think you just convinced me not to bring up controversial political or religious subjects at the Thanksgiving gathering of the family. If we're going to sit around waiting for the turkey, trying to figure out which is the worst of the 2 or 3 or 4 options that we're talking about, if we're going to talk about racism, anti-racism, anti-Semitism, Israel, Hamas, it just sounds to me like a train wreck waiting to happen. So let's just bypass it, which we can do on a lot of topics. But Jesus is the one who said, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I've not come to bring peace, but a sword," which I take to mean he's not necessarily looking to calm every situation, but if conflict is inevitable, then let's get the sword, including Thanksgiving dinner.
I see. You pick Thanksgiving dinner. I would stay away from that stuff at Thanksgiving dinner. There's a time to speak and there's a time to be silent. And Thanksgiving dinner is frequently the time to be. But again, your group. Some families thrive on this sort of like deep conversation, and some families, you got the You've got the super conservative uncle sitting over here and the super liberal uncle sitting over there, and it's best just to pass the mashed potatoes and everybody be quiet. And that's fine too. But just in general, you can't, as a Christian, if Jesus' resurrection from the dead is a public event and his lordship is a universal claim, then I'm not allowed to be quiet. I'm not allowed to say, well, it's my private personal opinion, so separation of church and state, I guess I should just be quiet. And I'm not allowed to do that. And there are going to be times when I do have to speak. Now, the text that you quoted is great because this is Jesus's way of handling current events and cultural movements and ideological positions. There's a lot of positions that Jesus could have taken that were on offer to him in the first century. And so some of which he was being encouraged to take. It looks to me when I read the Gospels that the Pharisaical rabbis are trying to encourage him to, you're one of us, we embrace you. Let's discuss what your positions are before they realize, oh, he's not one of us. So the big bugaboo standing over and above everything is the Roman Empire. And he definitely could have collaborated. He could have said, that's the powers that are. I'm going to work with them. The Sadducees do this. He could have, the tax collectors weren't Sadducees, but they definitely were collaborators. He could have definitely been well, Rome is God's will for us, and it's best if we just keep our separation of church and state. I'm here for your spiritual benefit. I'm here to help you psychologically. If you need counseling, if you need comfort, I'm here. But the Roman Empire, we can't really discuss that. That's kind of out of our purview. He could have done that. He didn't. He could have been a Pharisee. He could have said the Romans are bad. What we need to do is we need to try and enforce strict ritual and moral purity so that God would be on our side. He could have been an Essene. He could have said the Romans are bad, the Pharisees are bad. Let's move out to the desert and separate from everybody. Let's be fundamentalist. Let's be by ourselves. Let's be Amish. He could have done that. He could have been Zealot. It looks to me like at least some of his disciples thought this was the path he was going to take. Let's start an army. Let's go defeat Rome. Once we rise up against Rome, God will race to help us. I'm the true Messiah. I'm going to be the new king. But instead, Jesus says to the Zealots, put your sword away. To the Essenes, he refuses to go out into the desert and stay there. He moves around in the public square with all different sorts of people, talking about all different sorts of issues. Against the Romans, he says, do not give to Caesar what does not belong to Caesar. Give that if it belongs to God, give it to God. He refuses to play ball with everybody because his kingdom is different than any sort of ideological group that any of the humans could have founded, all which were based upon their power. Caesar wanted power. The Essenes wanted power. The Pharisees and the Sadducees each wanted power. The Zealots definitely wanted power. And Jesus wasn't going to play their games. He wasn't going to be co-opted by them, even though all these groups wanted to co-opt him when they realized that he was significant, that he was a cultural difference maker, that he was an influencer. They all wanted to co-opt him. He refused to do that, and it cost him his life. But in costing him his life, it gave him his kingdom. The death and resurrection of Jesus was an incredibly ugly defeat of his worldview, but simultaneously the victory of his worldview over all things. So that now Rome has no more power. The Essenes have no more power. The Pharisees have no more power. And I would just for those of you who are Christians who are listening, this is the story of the Bible. People worry so much about the Democrats and the Republicans. They have no power. The power that they have is so shallow. And Jesus' power is everlasting. The Democrats will be gone soon. The Republicans will be gone soon. The left and the right will be gone soon. But what will last forever is Jesus' kingdom of righteousness. And so to preach that, to live in that, to not allow yourself to be co-opted, I think is the vocation of every Christian.
I'm thinking about John the Baptist. He was the prophesied forerunner of the Messiah. That's a pretty important office in Scripture. Part of his job was to preach the good news of the kingdom. But he decided to take it further. King Herod had taken Herodias, Herod's brother's wife, to himself. Luke 3, verses 18 through 20 says, so with many other exhortations, he, that meaning John, preached good news to the people. But Herod the Tetrarch, who had been reproved by him, John, for Herodias, his brother's wife, and for all the evil things that Herod had done, added this to them all, that he locked up John in prison. So John was in a position to go out into the wilderness and baptize people and preach the good news, but no, he had to stick his nose right into Herod's business and call him out publicly about his adultery, his sexual immorality, and eventually it cost him his head. Mm-hmm. So maybe the lesson there is, don't be calling out the governor or the president or, the mayor or whatever it is. Just keep your conversations there at St. James Lutheran Church, and life will be so much better for you. But then there's John the Baptist. Right. So what do you do with that?
Yeah, I mean, so John the Baptist, he's not gonna belong. And Herod was a fan of his. The Gospels tell us that Herod was frustrated by John's not
fan enough to not cut off his head.
Yeah, he listened to him gladly. The Gospels say, here was a guy who was preaching against him, saying this is wrong. You can't be having sex with your brother's wife. But he still wanted to hear him. But even then, John didn't play ball, and so he got killed. Yeah, this is one thing where I'm probably going to step on some toes here. It is the job of the Christian church to A, repent of our own sexual immorality, and B, call it out when people in power use their power to aggregate for themselves sex. Look, this goes back millennia. King David was doing this. The pharaohs were doing this. People with power use their power to get sex. It's what they do. And it's dehumanizing. It's dehumanizing to the person who does it. It absolutizes power. It manipulates, in many cases, in the case of Herod, it manipulates women. It objectifies them, saying that you are the reward of my power. Christians have to call this out. Look, it's not just Herod the Great. It's American presidents and American governors who use their political power or use their financial heft to objectify women and turn them into sex objects. We cannot allow ours. We have to call this out. We have to be forthright about calling this out. Sometimes
you might lose your head.
You are going to lose your head, especially because both sides of the political spectrum in this country are against the sexual immorality of the other side, but they defend the sexual immorality on their own side. And we've seen this played out since I'm old enough to remember, character counts campaign that the right ran back in the 1990s when Bill Clinton was caught having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. I'm completely on board with that. Here's a man who's untrustworthy around women, but and the left in that case kind of shoot under the cart. He can still, we might not agree with how he lives his life, but that has anything to do with with the way that he, runs the country. And the right said, well, character counts. It does count. And when a Republican president recently was very clearly has lived a life of sexual debauchery. He's been very proud of that, and he's never backed down from that either. And the tables are turned. The left all of a sudden is self-righteous. This guy's evil. We need to get rid of him. And the righteous and the right side of the cultural right all of a sudden is defensive. Well, it doesn't have anything to do with how he can actually or his policies. And what both sides have done is they have allowed themselves to use Christian morality as a tool to beat the other up, but to defend themselves. And you're going to lose your head. John the Baptist definitely loses his head, but Christians have to call it out in both cases and say, right is right and wrong is wrong. And sex was intended by God to be a covenant committed thing between a husband and wife.
All right. So let's set aside just for a moment, not to ignore, but just to set aside Republicans and Democrats. And I'm not going to call any names here, but anybody who's been paying attention for the last 30 years can think of a number of prominent evangelical, denominational.
Now you got another group ready to chop your head off.
It's not just in the political realm. It's in the church. And there have been a number of, I'll just say TV preachers, not necessarily confined to TV preachers, who have been humiliated and Some have recovered to return to ministry. So it's in the church as well.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to what you're saying, and I don't know if I'm getting the message that you're trying to send, but I'm pretty much feeling I'm being talked out of taking up my sword and poking it in the eye of anybody, because at the end of the day, I can't claim the lily whiteness I need in order to advance these biblical moral constructs. I'm going to cut off my own head.
Yes.
That's the way it feels.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. We definitely have to get the beam out of our own eye. I'm talking to the Christian church, like you said. We have to get the beam out of our own eye. We have postured ourselves for too long as the moral people. And Jesus insists in the
sermon. Aren't we supposed to be the moral people?
We are, but Jesus insists on the Sermon on the Mount that if you even look at a woman to lust after her, you've committed adultery. And until we're willing to say, that's wrong. Jesus is not a Lutheran. So I think people know here, I'm a Lutheran pastor. Jesus is not a Lutheran. He stands over, he will not be co-opted by my synod. He won't be co-opted by the Roman Catholics or any other Christian group, all of which I'm glad to be a Lutheran. I'm proud to be a Lutheran, but I can't co-opt him. He stands over against me. He will not be stuck in my back pocket to pull out to poke somebody else in the chest. He's poking me in the chest. He's saying, Aaron Miller, you are a sexual sinner. And here you are bashing 2 American presidents, and you are no different than them. You need to repent. And that's why, so Christians, again, this is part of we can't allow ourselves to be co-opted by a group, because then we posture ourselves as the correct group. We're right, and we're here to tell the other group they're wrong. Christians, out of all people, because we are followers of the only one true Lord Jesus, have to say, we're in the same boat. Christians are called to be a kingdom of priests and a royal nation, but we are part of the problem. We also cave into the gods of sex, money, and power all too often. And when we talk about cultural, current events and Jesus' relation to them, we have to put that, like, it's great. It's totally fair of you, Chuck, to bring the Christian church in here, because somehow we felt like, well, because we worship Jesus, we stand above that and we don't allow ourselves, we are correct and the other people are wrong. And God stands against us too. We can't allow ourselves to say, as a Lutheran Christian, well, the Roman Catholic Church is horrible. Look at all the sex abuse scandals in the Roman Catholic Church and all those non-denom TV preachers who've been caught stealing money or having affairs. They're all bad. And I can't frame that in terms of Lutherans are good and they're bad. I just can't. That would be falling into this ideological side trap. It always has to be framed, God, forgive me of my own sin. Take the beam out of my eye. Give me the clarity to speak your truth in a way that John the Baptist did, where we don't know too much about John the Baptist's spiritual journey, or we know quite a bit about him, but not in terms of like what he thought about himself and things like that. But allow me to be repentant. Allow me to stand at the foot of Jesus of Nazareth so that I can say this is truth. Father, keep me from making myself the Messiah. Keep me from thinking that I'm right about everything. And you're totally right. To handle current events, including church current events, is going to require us submitting to the Lordship of Jesus Christ in all things.
Just a couple of quick questions here before we wrap up. Let's talk again about separation of church and state. Suppose I were to say to you, sure, it's okay. You can form your own moral view based on the Bible, however you want to define it. But when it comes to public policy that affects us all, that's where I draw the line. Don't bring your religious views on abortion or sexuality or men competing in women's sports into the government arena that affects us all. We're a nation of separation of church and state. How would you respond?
Yeah, that falls for a really simplistic but very, very prevalent Enlightenment lie that people fall for, which is the secular worldview is neutral and objective, and the religious worldview is biased and opinionated. And I will agree that the religious worldview is biased and opinionated, But I think what postmodern thinkers are letting us know now is that there's actually no such thing as an unbiased and unopinionated position. And secularism is just as much an ideology. And you hear this everywhere. I've heard this outside of the church. Tim Keller quotes in one of his books a statement by Christopher Reeve about stem cell research, where he said, we cannot allow religious discussion in the public sphere. Christopher Reeve said that I had a family leave my church not too long ago, and there was a husband and wife, and the wife is pro-abortion, and the church was a little bit too much pro-life for her. I didn't get a chance to talk to her. I tried. Her husband said to me, well, she just didn't like all the politics. I'm with you, Aaron, but my wife, she didn't like all the politics. So my response was, well, her position is political too. Like you can say separation of church and religion, separation of religion and politics, but when it's your political position, then you don't mind it being in the church. I mean, so one thing I could say is so I shouldn't. Is the question of human trafficking, is that a political issue? Well, of course it is. So I'm not allowed to speak to that. I'm not allowed to say that that's wrong. Well, no, you can say that's wrong. See, now we're getting closer to the rub. It's not that you're objective, my secular friend. You have your own ideology and worldview. You're actually just using the principles of separation of religion and politics. You're using that as a way to say, don't talk about the political and religious things that I don't like. You can talk about the religious, political things that I like. And so everybody has a viewpoint. The secular viewpoint is definitely ideological. It is not objective. If you say to me, well, I don't know, you could just pick any, you could pick any issue. I just wrap this up by saying, so I don't ramble on too much, is that the whole idea that religion and politics are two separate things. We're fast realizing that was a lie that was started about 300 years ago in the Enlightenment. It's not real. You can't separate religion and politics. Everybody's politics are based upon what they believe. So you can't separate those two. I, as a Christian, all I'm saying is that I'm going to speak politically what I believe. And I encourage anybody, whatever ideological persuasion you are, whether it's another religion or whether you're a secular person, an agnostic or atheist, you too are free to speak what you think is right based upon your beliefs. But don't imagine that somehow you're objective and I'm biased because you call yourself a secular. You actually, I've said this before in here, a secular person doesn't believe in God. I do believe in God. I can't prove to you that God exists, but the secular person can't prove that God doesn't exist. So anything we say about anything about God is going to be based upon faith on both sides, a faith position. As long as we're both okay with that, we can get rid of this whole nonsense that religion and politics should never mix. They totally should mix. You can't talk about politics without being a religious person.
They are mixed.
You
can't be unmixed.
Now, if somebody says, I think that church and state should be separate, we can have a discussion about that, right? Should the government tell the church what to teach? Okay, no. But that's something different than saying that religion and politics shouldn't mix. That's unavoidable.
Okay, one more quick question here. When the Apostle Paul went in on his missionary journeys, he went from city to city to city, typically went into the synagogue if there was one there. That's where he went first. And then eventually in Acts 17, he winds up in Athens, which is a worldly city, a huge city in the ancient world. And he sees all these idols and everything. He's offended by it. Instead of just sort of saying, well, this is a very uncomfortable place to be, I'll just move on to the next place and hope to find the synagogue. No, he gets out in public and starts talking his thing, and people start getting worked up. They take him to the Areopagus, which is where the big shot thinkers are, and it is hostile territory. Now, I don't want to leave our podcast listeners feeling uncomfortable here at the end of the program, but for a lot of people listening to us, this is their worst nightmare. Mm-hmm. Hostile territory. You want me to go into hostile territory? You want me to defend? I believe in Jesus. I want everybody to believe in Jesus. Do you want me to go into hostile territory? Can't I just stay in Sunday school on Sunday morning and stay in my circle of friends? They're all Christians, where it's peaceful and kind of comfortable. What's wrong with that? Not all of us can be Paul. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so his platform is certainly bigger than any of ours, but you are in hostile territory. Even if you just stayed in your church, there's going to be people who are opposed to your ideologies, especially if everybody knows this. This isn't like a news flash. I don't know if anybody who disagrees with this. Our culture is incredibly hostile. You just have to watch the news or be on social media for a little bit and see that it's a heck of a lot of angry people out there on every kind of, even Christians are very much angry. And the Bible says, don't be angry, don't fret. It leads to anger. Psalm 37 says, you're in hostile territory. If what you think is going to be public, which I've argued for Christians it should be, if the resurrection of Jesus Christ is a public event and his lordship is universal, it's going to be hostile. But you have to remember that Jesus, you quoted that at the beginning, that Jesus didn't come to, Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. And what he's talking about is he's not there to play nice. He's not there to create a free state of Israel. He's not there to, he's not there for people's psychological comfort, to fulfill anybody's political or economic or social dreams. He's there to turn everybody against him. That's true. That's what he does. But the end goal of that is, like he talks about in Ephesians 2, the reconciliation of God and man, and the reconciliation of man to each other, humans to each other. Even people who historically haven't been reconciled. In Ephesians 2, for instance, barbarians, pagans, and Jews, historically against each other. We see that even now. But Jesus comes to reconcile them. And so the goal, we don't need to be scared. I'm not saying it's fun, but we don't need to be scared of being Christians out loud in public. Because the goal is not to create enemies, but to create new brothers and sisters in Christ underneath the lordship of Jesus Christ. That's the only way peace on earth is going to happen, is if there's one thing to bind us all. That thing does not exist yet. You can say, well, we're human. Yeah, but we're not even really agreed on what that means or what the value of a human is. We mainly divide up on all different kinds of levels, But if Jesus is Lord of all and people acknowledge that, real peace will happen. The conflict will go away. And so as a part of our mission to be Christians out loud in public, not to create strife, not to to stir up anger between, not to side with one group over against another, but to represent the one person in the world, the God-man Jesus Christ, who can bring peace. That's our goal.
Amen. Thanks for listening to this edition of Craving Answers, Craving God. A dear friend in Bible class told me that she loves to listen to our podcast as she goes for her regular walks. This kind of feedback always serves as an encouragement for us. We'd like to hear from you. Email us at cacg@stjamesglencarbon.org. For Pastor Aaron Miller and our production manager, Larry O'Leary, I'm Chuck Rathert.